We will move now to the next part, which is the training session. I will be talking first about maritime spatial planning, and then we will talk about sustainable blue economy. Okay, is everyone here? Yes. Okay, so let's start. Before understanding what marine spatial planning is, we need to understand the relationship of humans with their environment. So ever since we started populating the Earth, okay, and we began living on this planet, we started using oxygen, water, food to survive. But we're also emitting CO2, whoa, what happened? CO2 and other things. Little by little, we started building homes. As we started building our homes and having small agricultural land, we used more resources. We need more building materials, fertile land, we needed fire to cook our food and heat the house. But so our emissions were increasing as well. We started having waste. We started having wastewater and garbage. With time, we began building settlements, and these settlements were mainly around major river basins in the world. So again and again, we needed more constructible land, we needed more fertile land, and in addition, our emissions were increasing. We had agricultural runoff, industrial runoff, and even pollutants coming from the agricultural sector. And that wasn't enough. We started conquering the coast, and we moved to building coastal communities. And as we started living by the coast, we started using more marine resources, we started extracting sand from the sea, and we started building industries by the coast. And again, our pollutants were increasing. We started having industrial runoff, more solid waste, more sewage, and all of it was going into the sea. And humans are greedy, so we colonized entire sea basins. Here you can see the Mediterranean, for example. We started using common resources for the Mediterranean basin. I'm talking about oil and gas, I'm talking about fish. We also started using maybe renewable energy. But as we used common resources, we started creating common challenges. The marine debris issue, for example, is common to the entire Mediterranean, to the entire planet. Solid waste, sewage, CO2 emissions, greenhouse gases, all of that was being emitted and thrown into the sea and our atmosphere. We also started reaching remote islands, and that was not enough for us to use all of the land areas. We started colonizing islands. We started using geothermal energy, hydrothermal vents, and even oil and gas offshore. And our pollutants reached the farthermost islands in the sea. So what is next? Are we gonna go to another planet? Is this even an option? Well, so far, no. So what we need to do is review our path, review our humanity, the path that humanity have taken, and try to see how we can restore the balance, because today our ecosystem is at risk, be it land or marine. Our culture and our heritage are at risk, and this is due to the fact that we are putting economic benefit, short-term economic benefit, as a priority. So what can we do to restore this balance? What can we do to have a sustainable development, and both on our coasts and our seas? Well, thankfully, mankind was able to develop planning tools throughout the years. So, for example, if you want to build a house, you want to decide where your kitchen goes, where your bathroom goes, you get an architect. So if you want to build a city or plan a city, you get an urban planner. He can tell you where agriculture goes, where you have high-rise buildings, where you have infrastructure, roads, water, electricity. Now, if you want to manage the activities that take place by the coast, you can have integrated coastal zone management, and it will help, with monitoring, following up with the activities on the coast. And finally, marine spatial planning is the tool to plan our oceans. So it takes us to the need for maritime spatial planning. Why do we need marine spatial planning? What is it that we're actually planning? Well, basically, we're planning the uses and activities in the sea. You may think, okay, but there's not much going on in our seas, particularly in Lebanon, because in Lebanon, we are still not having that many activities in the sea. However, this is exactly why we need to start now. Let's take a look at the different activities that we can have. We can have renewable energy, like wind energy or tidal wave. We can have seabed mining. These are destructive to the seabed, but it's an ongoing activity in many places around the sea. We can have oil and gas extraction. This is a relatively new sector in Lebanon that we can have an entire session dedicated to it. Environmental protection. This is one of the islands of the Palm Island Reserve in the north of Lebanon. Biotechnology, which is the extraction of resources used in medicine and pharmaceuticals, even in beauty products. Research and academia. This is the famous vessel that Abid was telling us about, the Kana vessel. This is what our sea can look like if it gets really congested. So this is Southeast Asia. As you can see, it's getting quite crowded. We have the sector of fisheries and aquaculture. This is a farm in Slovenia. I also visited with Dr. Abid Hassoun. This is a sector that is quite controversial in Lebanon, and actually I would like to propose it as a topic for debate. Is it something that we want to do or not? We have the shipbuilding and repair, which is a sector that is quite harmful to the environment, but also can produce a lot of economic opportunities. The security and military, and this is very relevant to the Mediterranean Sea. We're talking about migration, we're talking about unexploded ordinances. For example, in the beginning of this year in Venice, they found a World War II bomb that they exploded in the sea. Also in the East Mediterranean, we're quite familiar with military fleets and warships. But let's move to more happy activities. We have recreational activities, which is dedicated to the local, versus tourism, which is more foreigners coming and using the sea for leisure. We also have the sector of cultural heritage that Dr. Lucy Samaan has covered beautifully last time. So to recap, we have coastal heritage, we have submerged heritage, such as shipwrecks, but we also have intangible heritage. And this is something that we also need to preserve, particularly in the Mediterranean, as it is really rich in history. So this brings us to our question. Why do we need marine spatial planning? As you can see, this is the example of the Baltic Sea. Our seas are becoming quite crowded. So we currently need to create this balance between the need to use the marine space for economic activities and the need to protect it. So to answer the question, what is maritime spatial planning? If you see, we have three major dimensions. Of course, it's everything related to the sea. It has a spatial dimension, and it has a temporal dimension. So as a definition published in the IOC UNESCO document in 2009, it is a public process of analyzing and allocating the spatial and temporal distribution of human activities in marine areas. And it has to achieve ecological, economic, and social objectives. And this is usually done through a political process. So we have two major keywords here. Public, which involves the communities and public participation, and we have the political process, which involves government authorities. So who should be involved in the maritime spatial planning process? If we were in an interactive session that is face-to-face, it would be interesting to have you answer this, but let's go through them quite quickly. Basically, everyone should be on board because you have international organizations, you have the governmental authorities. When we talk about the government, we have the planning entity and the implementing entity. We need to involve local communities, the end users. We need to involve academic institutions and research centers who will inform the decision-making process. We need to involve private sectors because at the end, they are the ones who have the most attention, economically speaking. Of course, NGOs, but first and foremost, we need to involve the ecosystems because at the end, we need to have the ecosystem at the heart of planning. And this is when we are talking about ecosystem-based approach, as Dr. Nancy has mentioned. It's important to have this in the heart of the planning. So let's talk about the geographic scope of marine spatial planning. You may tell me, okay, so where can we apply this planning process? As you know, the UNCLOS has defined different maritime boundaries, with like territorial seas, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone. We have the high seas, which are beyond the national exclusive economic zones. So basically, in which part do we have marine spatial planning? And the answer is that it is quite wide. So we can apply it in all of these areas and in one of these areas. So how do we decide, okay, where do we want to have marine spatial plans? Basically, we have what we call the nested approach planning. So you start by having a very global overview, and then you start zooming in until you have local intervention. So based on this representation of the different scales or the multi-scalar approach that we can call, this is an example of a maritime spatial plan that is done on a local scale. This is Limassol in Cyprus. This is an example of an MSP done on a national scale. So this is the entire exclusive economic zone of the Netherlands. But you can also have marine spatial planning on an entire sea basin, or what we call transboundary. So the last photo shows a marine spatial plan that is done for the sea, the Bothnian Sea, that is uniting Finland and Sweden. So instead of having two separated plans that don't usually fall together in the puzzle, we will have one joint plan. And here I would like to highlight the difference between cross-border planning and transboundary planning. And this is particularly relevant in the Mediterranean and even in Lebanon. And it is quite problematic because obviously we have diplomatic issues in the south, but also because we have three neighbors. So we're talking about Syria and Cyprus and also our southern neighbors. So this is a very important tool in order to have a very continuous and coherent maritime spatial plan. So this is a visualization of how it can look like. I know I used to be scared when I saw these maps. It does look scary, but this is basically, you're just putting layers, layers, layers. So you have the maritime sector, transport sector, you have environmental protection, you have fishing, you have wind energy, etc. So this is the example of the German exclusive economic zone. And this is the example of Belgium. So what is interesting about the Belgium case is that their need for space is almost 3 times bigger than the availability of space that they have. So as a result, they started putting these different, spatial distribution of users in order to better manage this very small space. So now let's talk more about the actual planning process. In MSP, we need to ask ourselves 4 main fundamental questions. So where are we today as Abid, and this is the role of science and monitoring of marine parameters. So as Abid said, we need to understand what do we have now, what is our current status quo, and in order to start from a certain point. And then we have to ask ourselves, where do we want to be? We need to specify our vision for our seas. And then we need to know how to get there. Will it be spatial management plan? Will it be behavioral? Will it be a policy level? So this is the tools that we have already talked about. What are the tools that we will use to reach this target? And finally, we need to ask ourselves, what have we accomplished? And this is usually done after the actual implementation of the plan. So UNESCO developed a step-by-step approach. This is what we consider our Bible, let's say, in marine spatial planning. And it highlights the different steps that we need to make in the marine spatial planning process. So in the end, as we mentioned, it's a process, it's a closed loop. We need to always revisit our plans. We need to adapt them according to the results. We need to question ourselves, okay, is this working? Is this not working? But what is most important is to involve the stakeholders throughout the process. So on every step, we need to consult with scientists, with local communities, with authorities, etc., in order to achieve our targets. So what is important as well to address when we ask ourselves where do we want to go is to have scenario analysis. So for Lebanon, for example, if we choose an area, we want to say, okay, what do we want from this area? Do we want it to be a sea for fishermen? So do we want to do everything to promote fishing? So as you can see here, we have fishing vessels everywhere, all kinds of fisheries and everything. Or do we want to use it for business? So are we promoting more economic activities, more shipping, more tourism, etc.? Do you want it to be a sea for leisure? As you can see, we have dolphins, I think, here in cages. We have more sailing activities. We have more ferries going. Or do we want to protect our sea? So according to these different scenarios, we are able to set strategies and define policies that will help us reach our target. And this has to be done through a multi-sectorial consensus. So as we mentioned before, it has to integrate all of these sectors. So the target of such meetings that we're having today is to actually identify the targets of each sector and create a space for debate. Okay, do we want to promote this? Do we want to have this? Do we want to have that? So this is a very important step in marine planning. And as we mentioned earlier, the outputs of this plan can be through providing permits, different management measures, zonings, mapping, regulations, etc. This is a little bit to visualize the planning cycles that actually have to be continuous. You have to always revisit, revise, and adapt the plan. So in summary, the characteristics of marine planning are to be integrated and multi-objective, to be strategic and future-oriented, having to be continuing and adaptive, participatory, so involving everyone, ecosystem-based, and place-based, because at the end, there is no one-size-fits-all. It has to be very specific to the region that we're using. Now, what is the status of marine planning? So ever since the topic started gaining attention, ever since the different workshops and conferences, there have been many publications throughout the years. So, for example, in 2009, the Bible, the step-by-step approach was published by IOC UNESCO, and it has basically everything that you need to know, the 101 of marine spatial planning. A few years later, they published also an evaluation guide. So this is what I mentioned about having to review our plans, having to learn from different examples, from lessons, from experiences, etc. The target of MSP, through the MSP global target, is to achieve a 33% of the world's exclusive economic zones to be covered by a marine spatial plan. Today, we are at 70 countries who are at different stages of planning. So to summarize, the aim of MSP is to reduce conflicts between sectors, to create synergies between different activities. So how to see that, how can we include tourism and the fishing sector? This is something quite novel and being studied. How to encourage investment? We need to increase coordination within the country, but also promote cooperation between different countries of the common sea basin, and of course, protect the environment. So on this point, I would like to move to our next topic, which is sustainable blue economy. By definition, blue economy is a concept that we're trying to develop policies that include both the economic benefit and the environmental health of the ocean. So it's all about creating a balance. And as I mentioned, this is a policy-oriented strategy, let's say. And just like the marine spatial planning, we need to have stakeholder participation throughout the process. So as you're formulating the vision or the policy itself, as you're building national partnerships, as you're identifying what are the main sectors you would like to focus on, and actually implementing the policy and reviewing it, we need to involve all of you, sectors and institutions, into the process. So if you want to think, for example, let's have a blue economy strategy for Lebanon, this is more or less the process that we need to do. Of course, the blue economy has several challenges. Just a minute. We need to overcome the current economic trends. And the current economic trends are unfortunately degrading our ocean resources. We also need to overcome the inadequate capacity. And this is why, for example, MSP Global really focuses on capacity development, on capacity building, on relationships between institutions, between countries, between sea basins. So this is a crucial point. Another thing is, and this is very interesting because Dr. Nancy has mentioned it, because we need to overcome the inadequate valuation of natural capital, because we do not know the true value of our natural capital. So it's important to have economic tools that will help us evaluate this. And finally, we need to overcome the isolated sectorial management of marine activities, because as I mentioned before, the different sectors are working separately. So it's important for them to sit together on a common table and discuss. What are the potential actions? So of course, contribute to the protection of natural capital, using best available knowledge, hence the important role of science, prioritizing the sectors. So do we want to promote tourism, or do we want to promote fisheries, or do we want to promote transport, etc.? Anticipating the impacts of climate change, because at the end, as the majority of populations are living on the coast, and climate change is a true and real threat, even though many people are denying it, but we are actually starting to feel it and measure it and sense it, and we are seeing the repercussions throughout the years. So this is an important topic to tackle. Target financial instruments, because of course, without money, we cannot achieve any of those targets. And of course, an effective participation and inclusion, creating partnerships. And actually, one of the actions that we can generate through blue economy strategies are developing marine spatial plans. So let's talk now about a few examples. We're almost done, so this will be quite quick. So Seychelles actually has developed a blue economy strategy, and it's aiming to have economic diversification and, of course, food security, because as an island state, they're quite isolated from the world, so it's important to have food security, and of course the protection of the very rich biodiversity of the island. So what is interesting about the case of Seychelles is its land area is actually very small compared to its marine area. So blue economy strategy is quite important, and we can even say essential, and they cannot go by without an actual blue economy strategy. Another example is Africa. And Africa was actually able to set a strategy. It's a bit more long-term because we're talking about 2050. They have an integrated marine strategy for the African continent, and it's done by the African Union. And it's also revolving about creating wealth based on maritime activities. So of course, we have a thriving blue economy, but of course the environment as at heart. You can consult the strategy and the policy handbook published by the UN Economic Commission for Africa. And you can see how they're aiming to achieve their key objectives. And finally, one very important example is the European Union. So the blue economy strategy for the European Union is what they refer to as blue growth. And they aim for having a smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. They want to develop the sectors that will have a high potential to create jobs and growth. And of course, providing knowledge and legal certainty and security, because obviously security is a very important topic nowadays in all of the sea basins. And what is interesting about the European Union is that they develop strategies on sea basins. So you have the Black Sea, you have the North Sea, you have the Baltic Sea, you have the Mediterranean. And this is very important because you cannot apply the same policies from the north on the Mediterranean, obviously, because we have EU countries, non-EU countries. So the sea basin strategies are actually tailor-made, let's say, to the geographic context. And it's very interesting that the EU is going through with this because they realize the heaviness of the ocean economy and the amount of income that they can generate through the marine sectors. So you can consult different links, and once I share the presentation, what is important to take is that we need to have a behavioral change, a mentality change, because we're always prioritizing short-term benefit, and this is particularly relevant in Lebanon, because we saw the chaotic development of our coast, because they're thinking, okay, I want quick gain, quick money. But we need to favor long-term goals, because it's the long-term goals that will actually sustain our existence on the planet.